Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Karen Wastell. When Karen Wastell's computer science professor encrypted the final exam, she became hooked on cyber. Today, she is the CEO of W Risk Group and founder of Mojo Maker for Women in Tech. Her career highlights include the CEO of Atomic Tangerine, a Silicon Valley startup, and tenure as the Chief Information Security Officer at Microsoft Corporation, AT&T Wireless, and Russell Investments. W Risk Group provides customised guidance to help companies develop their information security programs, demonstrate due diligence to a defensible standard of care, and with Mojo Maker for Women in Tech, her Denver, Colorado team provides corporations high-quality mentoring, coaching, and leadership development for mid-career technologists to help stem the tide of women leaving tech. Karen, I'm so grateful to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. It's my pleasure.
So it'd be great to hear a little bit about how you got to this point in your career as a leader. You've gone from a security analyst to a CISO to now the CEO of your own consulting firm.
Right. Well, I can't take a lot of credit for being the captain of that ship. But what I would say is I started off in cyber when it really didn't have that name. At the time that I started, we had 3 cybersecurity or computer security products. Two of them were for the IBM mainframe, and the other one was government-furnished crypto gear. So it wasn't too hard to be at the cutting edge of that whole development of, first malware and then cybercrime and the response to that. And I had a very unique opportunity to be in that industry as it was basically growing up from infancy and had a front row seat. So the opportunities that I was given to participate in things like standard setting, where we were actually working out how we were going to do the communications between untrusted networks and all those kinds of things at the IEEE and at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the US, all of those things kind of just came together to give me a really solid foundation. So moving into leadership roles was sort of a natural transition because I had the breadth as well as the depth to work in that field. So I opportunities arose and I took them at every corner. And that's, really how it moved into my, my opportunities at AT&T Wireless and Microsoft and Russell Investments. I left the industry and took a short sabbatical, actually not a short sabbatical, a 3-year sabbatical, to pursue a bucket list item that I had at one point, which was to pursue being a chaplain. And it was in that arena that I realized that really I belong in tech, but marrying together the resilience aspects of, I realized that when I was working in the hospital, that one of the things that I noticed was that people were coming into the hospital with an accumulation of life events that were causing a fair degree of distress. And I looked at that and I go, gee, that looks like people in tech. And I decided to go back, especially when I learned that there was so much distress in the cyber community. And now I blend my background in tech and cyber with my background in caring for others and have created the program we call Mojo Maker for Women in Tech. That's how we got there.
So looking at how you've seen the influence of being outside of cyber and outside of tech for a short period and then coming back in and coming and going from the industry a few times, and I guess with Mojo Maker for Women in Tech as well, why do you think there's so few women in cybersecurity? And for those who do enter the industry, why don't you think they stay?
Yeah, the numbers of women in cybersecurity are growing, which is the good news. The numbers in tech in general have been dropping since I got my graduate degree in the 80s. And that was a big red flag for us. But yeah, I think in the last couple of years, there have been something like 11% of women represented in cyber. And that number is Steve Morgan in Cybersecurity Ventures. I think he would say that number is pushing upwards of 20%. But what I will say is that the numbers are still very low at the top of the organization. And the way I measure that is by reports and investigative research that was done last year, that was published in the Seattle Times on April 15th of 2018. And one of the things that it noted in there was that at the partner level in big tech firms, the number of women represented at that level was about 6%. So we know that there's kind of this plateauing. There's this career trajectory, which more and more women are coming in. My sense of it is that they're plateauing out. The numbers seem to show that they're plateauing out at like kind of a director level, maybe program manager, director level in these large organizations. And they're not making it to the top of the organization, which is where the decisions are getting made.
Yeah.
The other thing about that is it does seem like there's now a very broad application of the word CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. In some companies, that is somewhat of a glorified director level position, and in others, it's a true Chief Information Security Officer with all the breadth of responsibilities that go with a C-level position. So the title is used rather loosely. So it's hard to tell from the numbers how women are doing. And so the challenge is that we've got a great pipeline. We've got all kinds of programs for bringing women into this field. We have record numbers of women who are graduating with technical degrees in cyber and computer science. And then we have this huge drop off, like now they're not showing up at the top of the organization. So what's happening in the middle? And the thing that I think that's your question. And it seems that there's a sense that they don't see anybody like them at the top. There's a lack of community. There's a lack of cultural, I don't want to say cultural fit, but there's a big difference in benefits in a company that has something like beer on tap and foosball tables versus a company that has on-site childcare.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really makes it more family friendly in order to allow people to take on these demanding jobs and still have a life outside of work, we need to have more, I think, sensitive and tuned in work environments that make it possible, not just for women, but for anyone who ends up being a primary caregiver of family members, whether they be elders or children, to be able to participate in the workplace. That's just at the participation level, but to be able to also get to that level of, I think, the decision maker level at the top of the organization, there needs to be a couple of things happen. One of them is cultural change needs to happen in the workplace. So that's something that's kind of outside of a women's control or men's control. We can go out and advocate for change, but at the end of the day, if it happens or doesn't happen, we still have to figure out how to thrive in that environment if we want to stay there. So there's and this is where we came in with the program that we developed, and what we, ties in with what I saw when I was working at the hospitals is we have a set of things that we can do internally that will control our response to an environment that might be adverse. So that's resilience. And I think personal resilience, a personal level of confidence, and an ability to do self-advocacy in outside of a formal environment are very important to women who are in cyber and tech in general for being able to advance their career. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But I think at the end of the day, we don't see people like us at the top. That's discouraging. And that has to get fixed. However, we have to focus on the things that are inside of our sphere of influence in order for us to grow our influence. And I use often a metaphor that I got from Stephen Covey years ago that said, look, think of your influence as a balloon. If you have things that you want to do, that you want to improve, then you focus your influence, you focus where your energy where you have influence. Well, if your influence is inside the balloon and you blow into the balloon gets bigger, right? The influence grows. But everything outside the balloon is things that are outside of our sphere of control. So that has to do with things like companies' pay scales and companies' promotion policies and work from home policies and all those kinds of things. And if we focus our energy out there on all of that stuff that might not be right, it might not be just, it might not be fair, our influence will actually shrink. So what we really encourage everyone to do is focus on the places where you've got influence. By the way, that happens to be you. And grow your ability to self-advocate, grow your confidence, right? Do those things that help you show up, recognizing that the system is still broken and there are people out there, all of us, trying to get the message out that says if you want to be a talent magnet in this market, you need to have a work culture that supports families of all types and has a diverse and inclusive work environment. That's bottom line.
Yeah, look, I know you've spoken at length across the globe, in fact, about diversity and inclusion, and I think building them into any workplace is only going to have positive consequences. What sort of role does diversity play for you in hiring practices and sourcing plans, and not just for you within your own organisation, but the advice that you're giving to your clients as well?
Right. So to be honest, I focus on women in tech and developing women in tech, and then we have our outside platform, as you mentioned, which is we go out and kind of beat the drum. And what I usually end up doing is I bring in a lot of professionals who are experts in this space to speak to these questions. And so I compare it back to you what they tell me because I'm not a professional in diversity and inclusion. The reason I talk about it so much is because I can see that without it, women will not reach the level in tech that we need them to, and we will not achieve our goals in innovation and technology. Yeah. So I have always been relatively, in terms of my own hiring practices, I've always been relatively, I would say, we aren't big enough at this point to have formal hiring practices and processes. I tend to hire for the job, where people can come in and do the job and do the best job. Yeah. I will source people from all over the country, and I just want to really read their resume and talk to them on the phone. I don't need to know a whole bunch about, their cultural background or their preferences. We want to just create an environment that's welcoming for everyone, and that none of that really becomes an issue. But here's the truth. Here's the truth of it. And this is what the experts tell me. The biggest challenge to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is, frankly, we're human beings and we're wired to want to hang out with people who are like us. Yeah. We do that because it's easier. And we make decisions faster. We have conversations that are less challenging. Everything kind of flows sort of smoothly because we have a common lexicon and a common understanding of cultural background. And that makes things just easy to hang out. The problem with that is it leads to groupthink. Yeah. That it's a killer for innovation. So what we want to do is to strive to have a variety of people with different perspectives and roles. And that's the thing that we're most interested in. And sometimes that takes, from what the experts tell me, the thing that we really need to focus on is we need to network differently. We need to hang out in places that are different than the ones that we would just casually normally choose. We need to have relationships that are outside of our outside of our normal comfort zone. We need to be hanging out we need to be intentionally networking with communities that are different than the one that is I would call our community of origin, right? And get to know them and do our sourcing from, places that are not, it's not going to be the thing where we go to the local watering hole where we usually hang out and say, hey, who do you know that can fill this spot for me? Because that means I'm going to get somebody who thinks just like me. Yeah. Again, right? I have to go someplace different to get that talent.
And so outside of diversity and inclusion, which are clearly principles that or values that are important to you, outside of those, what are some of the other principles that you've followed? You've worked for some really iconic brands and built big security teams. What are some of the principles you've followed to bring those teams together across different organizations and with varying levels of maturity?
Yeah, I think that the main things that I really try to instill in my team is that the only problem that's a bad problem is the one that we don't talk about. Right? I don't want people to be worried that, oh my gosh, this is a problem. This thing has just bubbled up. This is like, I need to fix this because I can't let anybody see it. I'm like, no, we've got to know that these are there, because I take a very sort of a Six Sigma approach to thinking that says, problems, if we identify problems, then we actually can fix problems, right? A complaint is an opportunity to do something better. A problem is always an opportunity to do something better. And to go along with that, we really focus on process. I have a natural tendency to, maybe to a fault, but I tend to assume that people want to do a really great job and that they are going to do their best if they're given the opportunity to do that. My job is to figure out how to remove the barriers to them doing what they do best. And I believe in their ability to accomplish things that go far beyond their belief in themselves. And I might push them and hold them up to a fairly high bar for that, but that's how we got major stuff done, right? In all of those organizations.
And have you found that you've had many hurdles trying to find the right people to bring into those teams to help you solve those problems?
I've always been blessed with a really great team. Even at AT&T Wireless, we hired over 300 people in 10 months because we had a grueling merger and acquisition project that had to be completed. That's a whole nother talk. But we hired, I think, a lot for attitude. Yeah. Because here's the deal. If I hire strictly for talent in terms of a particular skill set, that person, if they're not willing to adapt and change as the need arises, then they're going to quickly become obsolete in this climate. We have so much change happening right now, and we're actually on this inflection point, this huge inflection point, as we're moving into things like, deep machine learning and AI and IoT and all of that. It's going to really change the security landscape. And in order for us to be successful in the long term, we have to have people who are really good at change, really comfortable with the unknown and not afraid to venture into that. Yeah. So I've always had those kinds of environments. Working in cyber is just like that all the time. So I've been pretty lucky to have, I would say, teams of people that were willing to get behind that and say, look, we don't really know exactly what we have to do here, but we're going to figure it out and we'll figure out how to get it done. And that's what I want. I don't necessarily want experts on a very particular thing. I can hire somebody from outside for that advice. What I want is people that are going to roll with it and grow with it.
I guess on that point, do you think that there are particular skills or roles that you can seek outside help for as opposed to the ones that you need hired permanently within your employees?
Well, it depends on, yes, of course. There's, although they're getting harder, some of them are getting harder and harder to find. So for example, a cloud security architect, everybody wants one right now, right? So even going outside to hire one, if I don't have one, is going to be, I'm going to pay top dollar for it if I can find one. Yeah. So there are some areas of expertise that are just going to be in very, very high demand, and going outside to outside companies to get that expertise is probably going to command top dollar. There are other roles that I think it just depends on everybody's business model. At one company, everything was in-house. Everything had to be done in-house. We had to do it our way. You might guess who that might be. And then another company took an approach that said, what I want inside the company are people who are effective at managing outsourced service providers. They're going to be the bulk of getting the work done. I just need people who can see things at a broad enough level to be able to administer and manage that. So it like the models, the work models that companies choose for their security teams is going to drive what kind of people you need to bring on board.
And so apart from that sort of context or that work model being a driver, there's obviously this talk about a skills crisis that's going on globally. Do you think that that is driving, or what sort of a driver is that in terms of the types of hiring practices that organisations need to have? And, do they need to change the way they're hiring because we're having this apparent skills crisis?
Yeah. Here's the deal. I just came back from the Army, the U.S. Army's Industry Day. That's where they hold and they invite all the outside vendors in who want to bid on the work. And the projects that they're talking about are these massive modernization of all the Army installations across the world. So I sat through that briefing and they stood up in the front of the room and said, look, we haven't really talked about cybersecurity, but the truth is that with all of these projects, everything comes to a screeching halt without security and privacy. And right at that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, we already have a shortage of talent. It just got a whole bunch bigger. And so here's what that means for companies. They cannot rely on burn and churn. You cannot, it won't work anymore. If you want to have talent for your company to get the work done, then depending on your business model, the best possible way of doing that is to grow people inside. Bring them on, make sure you keep them, develop them, grow them into, giving the opportunity to work broadly across the company. That is going to really be the only way people are going to make it work, because the numbers, holy smokes, the numbers game. If you look at how much it costs to hire a new person, so let's just say you have a chief security architect leave, you're going to be somewhere in the range of, in US dollars, I would say in the range of $250,000 to $300,000 in lost productivity and out-of-pocket costs to replace them.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? So we have to have a way. That's why retention is such an important part of this equation, is in terms of hiring practices and talent management. We talk a lot about hiring and we talk a lot about onboarding and everything. And the fact is, if you don't keep them, because it's a seller's market, if you don't keep them, it's going to be a significant drain on your resources and your ability to get things done. Talking
about retention, it's probably a good segue to ask you about hashtag Be an Ally. What's the impact that you're having on the tech, or you're trying to have on the tech industry with that program? Right.
Be an Ally was born out of our interview last fall with Intel Corporation.
Okay.
So I talked to, that's still out there online somewhere, but on our webinar, but James Gordon came on to talk to us about his role as in platform security at Intel. And one of the things that he talked about was it just really struck me how in the company, if you have a population, let's just say for laughs, you have a company that's actually reached, 30% women or 50% women, and it's 50% men. If you have any initiative that you want to get done, you must do it with the full participation and engagement of all parties. You can't get any kind of movement accomplished with half that group. And Intel had set some very aggressive targets a few years ago under the CEO they had at that time to make sure that their workforce in the US matched the demographics of their customer set. So, because Intel had a long history of kind of being, very homogenous in terms of its, the workforce represented, mostly like white men, right? so they set out to be very intentional about changing that, and they were very successful at it, and they completed it 2 years early. And the way that they did that was by the concept of the very engaged role of an ally. So there may have been like there's underrepresented groups, including women, that needed to be raised up. And then there are the allies who are helping with that raising. And in the Be an Ally context, one of the things that was so profoundly impactful to me when we realized it is if we reach out to raise up a group, it's not a scarcity. We're not in a scarcity situation. When we raise up one group, it doesn't mean another group goes down.
Yeah.
It means all groups rise.
Yeah.
And so Be an Ally is really focused on this idea that we in tech and in cyber, there is such an abundance of opportunity here to make room for people to join us, that if we can reach out and raise up other groups to bring them into the fold, everyone is going to benefit, especially the companies who have a diverse and inclusive workforce. Because here's the deal. From a diverse and inclusive workforce, having an environment that is inclusive, that's truly inclusive, comes from the same place in our human nature as having an environment that's highly creative, highly innovative, and highly productive. So if we have to crack that nut, right, to make sure that we have this environment where people don't just have to fit in, but they come as they are, and we welcome them in as they are and create an inclusive work environment that honors that. That's where we're going to really blossom, where everybody's going to rise up. And that's what Be an Ally is about.
I love that idea of welcoming people as they are, as opposed to assimilating them into the culture that they're joining. Right. Yeah, it's brilliant.
You know, Brene Brown makes a comment about that in her Netflix. I don't know if you're a Brene Brown fan, but in her Call to Courage, one of the things that she says is the opposite of fitting in is belonging.
Yeah.
We need a workplace. We need workplaces where people belong.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, I like to ask all of my guests, what do they wish they could have told their 20-year-old self about building teams and about being a leader? What wise words would you have for your 20-year-old self if you could go back and tell them something about leadership in cyber now?
I would tell myself to get over my fear of failure. I realized at one point in my life, and it's been quite a while now, that I was driven by a fear of failure. Like, I worked crazy, crazy hours in order to button everything up so that it would always, there just was very little opportunity for something to go wrong or sideways.
Yeah.
And I think that took a tremendous toll on me in terms of, I just lived with that huge critic in my head that was telling me nothing was ever good enough. And I've learned to shush that. But the thing is like, don't live in fear of failure. Live doing what you love. And know that you're going to go down face down in the dust. You know what I'm saying? That's what courage is. I love the phrase that Brene Brown uses that says, courage is not accepting the fact that you might fail. It is knowing that you're going to fail and be okay with that and know that you're going to rise out of that.
I think that's a brilliant way for us to wrap things up, Karen. I've really enjoyed the chat, and I'm so inspired by the work that you're doing around not just women in technology, but all sorts of groups, and the piece around Be an Ally and really raising people up so that we can retain people in our workforce is something that you should be so proud of. And I'm really grateful for you sharing with us today.
Oh, thank you, Claire. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great. That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.